Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, is David Griscom.
How's it going, brother?
It's going well, and we're excited to be joined today by Robin Wonsley. Robin is the first Black Independent Socialist City Council member representing Ward 2 in Minneapolis. There's a lot to get to just in that introduction there, but Robin, welcome to the show. And why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and let us know how you became a socialist and why you decided to turn that those beliefs to electoral politics.
Ooh, all of that in 30, 40 seconds? Just
got as much time as you need.
Well, no, thank you so much, Matt and David, for having me on. I always love following your show, especially, one of the few spaces where you elevate leftist and real leftist politics. So thank you so much for having me on today. As you shared, I'm Councilmember Robin Wonsley. I have the honor of representing Ward 2 specifically on the Minneapolis City Council as its first independent Black Democratic Socialist. And it's so challenging to pinpoint where specifically, when I woke up one day and was like, I am now a socialist. I would really just have to say, growing up in a country and cities, especially, I want to know for me, I've, spent all of my adult life and childhood living in democratically ran what was supposed to be liberal cities. I'm originally from Chicago and then moved to Minneapolis as an adult, as my next hometown. So again, what's supposed to be these progressive liberal abysses. And it's also the places where I've experienced my family, my friends and loved ones, especially those that look like me, have experienced some of the grossest forms of just injustice, So I would say my journey to socialism came from life. Living in the South Side of Chicago, one of the most racially segregated cities in the country, then moving to Minneapolis. And, there's extensive documentation that constantly positions Minnesota as one of the worst states for Black people in particular, and one of the worst states for any type of, economic or racial inequities in the U.S. And all of that has just shaped my daily lives, going to schools that were constantly under the threat of closure, living in subpar housing, but still having my mom, having my wages, go down while rents are going up, having to spend from the age of 1, visiting prisons, because many of my loved ones end up being enraptured from the massive crime legislations that the Democratic Party championed in the late 90s and early 2000s. So really, I became a socialist because of life, and also because there's not really any other choices. If I don't want these circumstances to exist, where these are the only material conditions that Black and brown people and women and non-binary people have to constantly tolerate, these conditions of exploitation, of violence, of dispossession, the socialism was the only thing that I came to learn about that provided a way forward where we can actually, as working class people, as Black and brown people, take land, take resources, take our wages, take everything that's extracted from us back into our collective ownership, and away from the need to divide us, away from having us to engage in harmful and violent relationships with each other. We can take all that back and actually create systems, create relational ways of being with one another that actually support our collective well-being, that supports our collective material needs, and not have profits be at the core of that. So to me, socialism has been really what's the other choice? Because I've only lived under racial capitalism, and I can tell you, this system is hot trash. It is flaming garbage. It flames every single day. There's a crisis every single day. And for all of the wealth and all of the billionaires and trillionaires that we have, many of our everyday, issues cannot be resolved under the system. So for me, this provides the only way forward towards something better.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, David. You going to say something?
Oh no, I was just gonna. I mean, like, I love hearing that so much, and I do have to say that, like, there is really no better education than life, for getting you to take these commitments seriously. But I wanted to sort of ask and frame it in the sense of your run for city council. Um, and could you take us through that sort of timeline and what brought you from the position of like, all right, I have these views about the world, I feel like something needs to be done, to then filling out the forms and the paperwork to be on the ballot to run for office. And the second bit, which is something we always try to ask elected officials who are socialists, like there's the two sides of the electoral question, right? There's the first bit which gets a lot of attention, like how do you win an election, right? Very important. But as you know, it's like the real work starts the second that you show up in the office. So you sort of have to navigate state and government power and find ways to, one, be successful, and two, to show up for the people who elected you in the first place. But yeah, could you talk to us a little bit about the decision to run and how you're using the office, to benefit people and also build a kind of stronger socialist movement, both locally and maybe even, across the board?
Yeah. So the first question about, how did I get to this place of running? There's two specific events that really shaped that decision. The first was my early introduction into organizing in Minneapolis in 2015. That was actually shaped by two movements. Black Lives Matter movement, which had just started to come into fruition here in Minneapolis. Unfortunately, after our Minneapolis Police Department executed a young Black man by the name of Jamar Clark. That prompted an 18-day occupation outside of our 4th precinct. And this is also happening alongside the Keystone Pipeline organizing, but also that intersected with another growing movement here, specifically around workers' rights, but particularly the fight for 15. So for me, again, growing up in Chicago, I know policing happens in largely Black working class communities that have been historically underinvested in. So we have this movement for justice for Jamar Clark happening in the fall of 2015, and then the Fight for 15 movement happening also simultaneously. And to me, it made sense, to link both of those fights. We're talking about increasing wages for what is largely, low wage workers. They're disproportionately working class Black people, but also are living in communities that are overly policed, and leads into situations like what we were dealing with Black Lives Matter, like you being making contact with the police and maybe even being killed by them in the midst of that contact. So when I was asked to join that movement, the Fight for 15 movement, it was just like, this is a brainer of like connecting these two. But in that process, that's where I got to see the limitations of liberalism, like in its full on scale. Again, at that time, Black Lives Matter, workers' rights, real booming. We had the most diverse city council at that time. It was supposed to be like the most progressive of the progressives. And when we approached every council member and the mayor in 2015 and said, will you get behind a $15 minimum wage? Most of them said no. There was like, this will, send businesses out of our city, will become an island. Civilization as we know it will crumble. No, what are you talking about? Maybe we can talk about $11, maybe $12, but not 15. It was just like, are y'all being for real right now? Like, Black people are dying. Like, you have a police department that we spend millions of dollars in settlements on. Like, what are you talking about? You can't guarantee $30,000 to like ordinary people in our city. That's too much. That will kill us. That's a problem. So having to then fight what was supposed to be a liberal city council for 3 years. I mean, they sued us to prevent us from putting this on the ballot. Like, it was a drawn out fight to win, $6 billion, I think is what total from what we move out of the pockets of shareholders, into the pockets of low wage workers to win that and make Minneapolis the first Midwestern city. At that time, people was like, you should run. Like, and I was organizing as a socialist, both on the Black Lives Matter front and within Fight for 15. And we were the independent arm of that movement that would call out the Democrats to be like, you can't talk about racial equity in one sense and then say you support poverty wages in the next. That's a problem. Wasn't ready to run at that point. But fast forward to 2020, the world watched our police department once again lynch a Black man publicly. And I thought back to 2015 to be like, why in this liberal city where we have progressive, quote unquote, or diverse representation, why are we constantly in this same predicament? Now to the point that we have sparked a global uprising, like cities around the world are on fire because we have failed to address the deep inequities of violence, of exploitation here. But yet we like to pat ourselves on the back and say we have progressive representation. That's not true. And in the wake of seeing the absence of our leadership, I'm talking about, at the beginning days of the uprising, and being like, I can't sit on the sidelines anymore. Like, I could not imagine in that moment moving forward, angry that the movements that I've had the honor of being part of that have fought tooth and nail, many of these progressive council members and leadership for the most bare minimum concessions, I cannot sit on the sidelines and watch them be denied again without trying to intervene, without trying to do something. And it became very clear that the voices of our movement have been completely absent from City Hall. And that gets at the next question that you raised. Like, that's exactly why I came into City Hall. I thought of, during 15, if we only had one city council member, just one, who made the effort to bring forth a minimum wage policy, or if we just had one council member that was willing to take on MPD head on for the past 5 years, and called out to question how, corporate agents in our city and the capitalist class wants to continue to keep Black and brown people and working class people in subjugated positions. Like, if only we just had that one person to be a voice, to amplify the needs and demands of working class people, what difference that could have made. And 2020 crystallized that for me, that I needed to step in spiritually. I wanted to be there. I did not want to continue to be on the sidelines. I didn't want to continue to see that absence within City Hall. And you're right, that is where the work has come, really starts to take place, because now you're transitioning, or for me as an activist, to elected official. And what, as an independent socialist or any leftist, you're immediately going to be attacked about, you're going to be attacked on your ability to govern. So that has been the biggest piece of, how do I balance this commitment to working class struggle, to a socialist future, to a socialist praxis, with governing? And governing is the way that they try to trip you up, to say, like, you're not prepared, your activism is causing more divisiveness, because we're raising very clearly the political inequities, the economic inequities that's taking place within City Hall, and how City Hall and local government is used to propagate these status quo systems. We're calling that out. And I'm, as much as stressful as it is, because I'm literally behind enemy lines. We're literally talking about, like, local governments are used to uphold, like, the interests of the capitalist class. And I'm here as an insurgent. Like, the pressures to fold, the pressures to be silent, the pressures to be pushed out is very real. But if I wasn't here, I could not imagine just how farther disconnected this space would be from working class people, especially being the first administration since George Floyd's murder. And unfortunately, a month into my tenure, seeing another Black man be executed, Amir Locke, while he was sleeping. And not only, I have to echo this too, like, I'm not only grateful that I get to be here, I also get to be here alongside two other socialist council members. And I worked on Ginger Jetson's campaign in 2017, who was also looking to be the first independent socialist here. I also worked very closely with Ty Moore, who ran also to be an independent socialist council member in 2013. There was a world where in Minneapolis, we couldn't even imagine having one, independent council member, to now we have 3 socialist council member and one as a Black independent socialist council member. So I'm glad that I'm not here by myself, bringing the movements, the demands of our movements into a space that has been inherently oppositional to those movements, to really reshape our political terrain to advance working class struggle.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. You chose to run as independent socialist as opposed to the dual track endorsement where you get a socialist endorsement and the Democratic Party one. And, I just want to shout out GP Jacob of Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast. Like, I think his perspective on this is right. Is like, people run on the dual track. Like, I like that. I want to see them win. When the independent of the Democratic Party, it's a little bit more interesting to me. But I just want to hear your experience running and winning that way. And yeah, like a little bit of now you don't have the Democratic Party like to sort of get your back on some of this stuff, how that's playing out now you're in office.
Yeah, I think it was always clear to me from the beginning of like, as an abolitionist, I don't just extend that to like prisons. I extend that to every, system that governs working class people's lives. And politically, I think of our party system. The only options that we're given as working class people are the Democrats and the GOP. And again, my life experience, having been raised in cities that have been predominantly governed by Democrats, also growing up in a period where from federal to state to city, all Democratic elected leadership. And again, experiencing the rise of some of the most historic social movements because material conditions have worsened so greatly. Like, to me, it was just like, oh, these are two sides of the same coin. Like they're both, operating with the same goal of preserving and protecting the interests of the capitalist class in our society. And one just has a better PR machinery. They make it look like racial capitalism can be inclusive of, all of our respective identities and ethnic backgrounds in our communities. And the other one just says, actually, you all can die. We don't care. It's just better PR on one, but y'all all aim to like make sure that US Bank is straight at the end of the day. Like, you all want to make sure Jeff Bezos ain't got to pay no more taxes that he already don't pay to working class people. So for me, in an abolitionist practice, like, this was an opportunity to show for working class people. And actually, we got a glimpse of that with Bernie Sanders' 2016 run. I mean, I know he ran as a Democrat, but it was very clear he was not the Democrats' choice. And they did everything, and they did successfully end up blocking him. But he essentially ran an insurgent campaign. He ran basically independently. And we saw that working class people were excited about his vision around this political revolution that prioritized the 99%. And many of these working class people were part of unions and all sorts of organizations that was typically attached to the Democratic establishment that were going for Hillary. We saw rank and file, ordinary working class people reject that and go behind Bernie. So Bernie campaign actually showed an opening that working class people, when there's a candidate that is in lockstep with our demands, with our interests, there's support to build political infrastructure behind them. And to do so without these political parties that often work against our interests. And I think we wanted to demonstrate that here in Minneapolis. And fortunately, in my race and in my ward, who preceded me was actually a Green Party candidate. Shout out to Cam Gordon, who, I mean, we still have a great relationship. He's an advisor of mine, but he was the longest serving, Green Party in the US, and he represented my ward for 16 years. So we already had this embracement of political diversity here. So me coming in, it wasn't like, whoo, what? No, social, like, no. So, for me, it was like, okay, there was an opening there in my ward, but also opening to show that working class people do not need to tie themselves to political parties, especially here in Minnesota, where we actually have a history of the DFL. There was a Farmers Labor Party. Like, we've known at many points that the Democrats was trash, and we've sought to organize ourselves separately from them. So here's another opportunity to build a independent political power. And of course, we faced resistance from the DFL. They took our van data early on. They sent in a corporate back challenger after us. Like, we had to do a recall process. Like, they're going to go after you. And it's because we had the support and backing of working class people that I get to be in this position and co-govern with them. And then, yes, that second part of the Democrats now being in office, how to navigate with them. I like to use the example, after Amir was killed, on February 2nd, I believe it was on February 3rd, that I went to our full council meeting and called publicly for the resignation of our mayor, Mayor Fry. I can do that because I'm not beholden to a political party. I can do that because I've been in lockstep with our movements, especially those fighting for a city that is not constantly held hostage by a violent policing system, and know that much of the protections around that system as it stands right now in the status quo, most of that has happened under the current leadership of our mayor.
Yeah.
And I had no issue with calling that out. Many of my colleagues are worried because we're in a 2-year election cycle right now. They're thinking of like, well, I might need his support, or like, I can't do that because I'm going through the party process. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about how are we delivering better conditions, material conditions for working class people. How are we making sure government is actually prioritizing the needs of working class people instead of our downtown council, instead of the chambers of commerce. And these are people that the DFL or Democratic Party seeks to partner with time and time again, seek donations from. And it's just like, no, they're class enemies. Why would I? No, we're not BFFs. And it's nothing personal. I just know what you're here for, and you're not here for my people. So, I mean, I think there's a degree of freedom that I get to have and actually holding the left flank of our current political environment. I'm not beholden to our state party politics. I ain't got to deal with none of that. If I have drama, it's drama because I called out your relationship with class enemies that I know is hurting working class people and making demands on you with working class people to do better. I'd rather have those problems.
and I mean, it's nice too that you don't have to spend or waste time, frankly, being forced into fundraising for people who are actively working against the policies and programs that you want to put forward, which is one of the difficult things that even independent, Democratic Party members have to deal with too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we raised every single dollar on our own through like talking to ordinary people. And that just shows, I hope we're a walking reminder that people do not have to, the trash, the crumbs that they're given. I mean, I know we're going to touch on this on the Roy versus Wade case, but how many decades have that been under attack? How many iterations of federal and local government has been under Democratic leadership? Like right now, we have that in Minnesota. There's a law in the books that they can pass right now that makes it so that Minnesota is a sanctuary hub. And we have a Democratic governor, a Democratic House.
Yeah.
And a Democratic city, one of the largest cities in the state. Bruh, make it happen. Fight for people. Just do it. Yeah. The Republicans understand the assignment all the time. They are in lockstep with Nike's slogan, just do it. How about y'all with that same energy?
Yeah, they have no problem with doing that shit in the minority, let alone if they enjoy the big majorities Democrats have for a while. You want to ask about?
I want to ask about something else quick that kind of occurred to me. So, we talked when we had GP Jacob on, he called Fry the sort of perfect neoliberal mayor, and that he'll sort of present well and then, stab you in the back. And the other thing that you have, I know about Minneapolis, I'm from North Dakota, is you have a whole lot of corporate headquarters there. And then on the other side of things, you have Amazon walkout by a bunch of workers who wanted their pay raises to be continued to be honored, and time off for religious holidays. And I also saw you were supported the Augustana Staff Union. So talk a little bit about your role as a socialist elected and this rise in union activity we're seeing, and what you think about that generally and what you think your role is there.
Yeah, I have to know, prior to coming into this role as city council, I worked as a labor organizer for our statewide teachers union. And I did so because politically, while there's many critiques that I have of unions, especially in regards to their relationship to the Democratic Party, which often stalls how they can deliver better, outcomes and better conditions for their rank and file members. I mean, it's one of the few institutions that we have that are intentionally governed and self-sustained by working class people. It's an independent institution to challenge, this hostage situation that workers have to endure under the system of racial capitalism with our bosses. So, to me as a socialist, if you're really talking about like building for the liberation of working class people, and thus from this system of racial capitalism that relies on the class property owners, or basically the capitalist class who all owns the means of production, like really are about like freeing ourselves from that, then you have to support institutions that focus on working class people, that are governed by working class people, and unions are it. And we're seeing a rise of that in this historic moment of I would say late stage capitalism, where we're seeing working class people, and I mean especially for millennials, raise your hand if you're a millennial, like we was the last generation that was like promised the sun, milk and honey and everything. It was like, Obama was out there being like, go to college, y'all, and you're gonna be good. You are gonna be good. You're gonna have that house, the picket fence. You want 2 dogs? We ain't gonna give you 1 dog, you get 2. And then the market crashed. It was just like, wait, what? So I'm broke? I can't buy a house? Like, wait, what? Also, all this debt, where all this debt come from? You tell me I was going to have to spend the rest of my life paying off debt. Like, we're literally here at this late stage capitalism where millennials was like all the way due. We was told if we did everything right, go take on extra debt, and then go into a job market that pays like slum wages, like we would be straight, and we're not straight. So we're seeing, I think, a very rightfully so, this rise of workers who are not only organizing, but organizing in sectors that I would say traditional unions have really stepped back from. We saw the retreat of, I would say, traditional unionism in the late 80s, early 80s, late 90s. They really led a retreat from a militant like politics and unionism. And we're seeing the rise of that again, thankfully so, by workers who have likely never had any contact with traditional unions. I think of like Chris Smalls, of course, like that man employed like real militant, not only tactics to like win over those workers, but he did so under like a militant politics. The man was reading or the organizing team was reading what Trotsky and Lenin, like they were reading a Marxist politics that guided their organizing, because they understood who they were up against, who their class enemy really was. And that is so detached from like traditional unionism right now. Like you can't even talk about Marx. No, don't say those words. So I think we're justifiably seeing this rise, and I'm really excited that Minneapolis specifically has also been at the forefront of this larger labor movement. Just several weeks ago, we had our teachers lead a historic 3-week strike, which they haven't done since 1970s. And they explicitly called out, the ways in which philanthropy, the divestment in public education comes from like the capitalist classes, it's specifically those headquarter corporations that you named. Like we went out during their actions towards different headquarters, like US Bank, like we named who are responsible for us not being able to have nice things as working class people. So I'm really, really excited to see that working class, that Marxist, that socialist politics is also accompanying this rise of militant and diverse union organizing that's happening in so many different sectors. I love that part of like from service industry. Several years ago in 2020, we saw a rise of union activity among service employees, our waiters, our servers here in Minneapolis. Then we saw that spark of fire amongst nonprofit, employees. Now we're seeing that in my ward with, you mentioned our university employees. Augsburg staff union just recently formed, and they're leading an amazing fight against their, private liberal arts institution for a better contract. Like we're recognizing that capitalism or your bosses is not going to give you shit. You got to demand it.
It's something else. I know somebody who works for Target, and they've been under scheduling, so there's not enough people to do the work, and apparently it's because they don't have enough money. And I look at the most recent earnings and $1.54 billion. So I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know why exactly they're unable to find the money.
And I also know when we were fighting for 15, like one of our partners met with like some of the leaders, shareholders and executive leaders at Target. And they were initially the main ones been like 15 would kill us. 15 would kill you of all people? 30?
Yeah.
Really? What? And now what their starting wage right now is like $20-some an hour because don't nobody want to come work for y'all for like poverty wages. So they got the money. Don't give your CEO a bonus for like 5 years. They'll be straight.
Well, it's like one of those things. God, I can't remember what plant. It was UAW, but I can't remember what car company it was. And it's like something in like the 50s or 60s. And the company was saying like, oh, well, we need to slash wages to, because we're not as profitable as we want to be. And the union came back and they said, well, let's look at the books. And if you started like, we can find some places where, we can probably make some cuts and there aren't to our wages. It didn't end up happening. It ended up, unfortunately, like leading to more crushing of those unions. But it's like that kind of mentality. It's like, we're pretty smart folks out here. Like if you are saying that like, the math is neutral and we can't control the math, let us give us a little shot at look inside of those books to see if there's some fat that we can cut off before y'all start telling us about like the divine logic of the market.
And I think that's where, I'm sorry, I didn't answer that last part of the question of like the role as like a socialist elected leader. It's like, we should be amplifying that. Like for me, when the teachers announced that they were striking, and then also we learned that there were a Starbucks location here in Minneapolis that was looking to unionize, that's saying we recognize like it's important to link those struggles together, whether you're serving a latte to someone in the morning or teaching someone kids. Like you are workers who deserve a dignified workplace and you deserve respect, and that respect should be translated to your pay, to your benefits, to how you're treated, towards the racial environments that you have to deal with. Like that should be reflected there. And as a city official, we should be saying any businesses that do work here, that's the threshold. You need to be prioritizing the needs of your workers. So we actually moved to pass a resolution in support of our striking MFT workers at the time, as well as our Starbucks workers, like using this bully pulpit that we have to amplify the movements and the organizing that's happening that our workers are leading here. So, I think that was another opportunity that we used to leverage, this role. But also, like, I'm a policymaker. Like, we have a wage theft policy here in Minneapolis, but often the issue comes around enforcement. So one of the ways that, my office is recently trying to figure out how do we let folks know that you can come to the city and report your boss if you think they're stealing your wages in through actual just like not paying you or through your benefits. Like you can report that to the city through a co-governance model. So we've partnered with workers' rights centers who do a lot of recruitment, a lot of outreach. And one of those instances, thank you to Rock, Minnesota Restaurant Opportunity Center. They actually worked with a group of students who was working at a Blaze Pizza in my ward and contacted the city because they was like, my paycheck's been short, something's not right. And then the city ended up doing an investigation and found that Blaze Pizza has stole more than $30,000 from those students. So like even having, the policies that we have here that's supposed to be protecting workers from 15 to earn sick and safe time, making sure in my oversight capacity, like we're funding staff to carry out those investigations, to enforce them, and to pass newer policies. Like 15 is actually dated. We should be looking at, upping that right now. If Target can pay $20 million, we should be looking to have a standardized policy that reflects that. So looking as a policy role, how are you passing policies or legislation that's truly meeting the needs of working class people as well? So I think that's also a key component of how we can use the seat as socialists to really meet the needs of working class folks.
I mean, that's really beautiful. The idea that someone's experience of their government would be their government looking out for their paycheck as opposed to, like let's move to policing now. You've already touched on how motivated your sort of run has been by the Minnesota Police Department, which has been emblematic for the sort of racist and murderous and systematically just against civil liberties approach that these departments take. There was a new report released by the Minneapolis Department of Human Rights. Where are you telling your constituents we are with the Minnesota police, and where do we need to go?
I've started with the latter. Where do we need to go? Because where we're at is not working. And I mean, it's sad. I know that report was pretty damning, but it also served as confirmation for many, residents who actually thought that this police department, this policing system that we have could be reformable. It could be redeemable, that we don't have to looking at public safety solutions that go way beyond policing. Like we don't really need to invest in that. We could just work on fixing what we have. And that report, I think, helped solidify like, no, no. And I think for me, I've been very clear that we need to be investing specifically in unarmed public safety services that is going to uphold the highest standard of quality and ethical services for all of our residents, to make sure that there is standardized accountability policies that governs our public safety workers, that are going to be enforced diligently by, be it us on the legislative side or by, unfortunately, the mayor, which I've been very clear. When it comes to police, the mayor has sole authority over that. And there is nothing in their way that bars them for exercising the legal authority that they have to implement reforms and restructure or transform a policing department from what is currently operating as. Now, if they don't do that work, that's a question of political will. And that's not my political will, but like I've been moving, at least on the council end, for creating a new Department of Public Safety. And this, this conversation has been happening for the past 2 years. We had, the very high profile public safety amendment campaign, Yes on 2, that happened over the past year and a half, that unfortunately was defeated on last November. That would have allowed us to have a new Department of Public Safety that would have got rid of the staffing minimums, because that's even come out. Like, there's no, police. We don't need more police. We need a different rearrangement of how we're staffing public safety workers to meet the actual comprehensive needs of our residents. But it would have got rid of that. And most importantly, it would have changed oversight structures over our public safety system. So it will be shared between the mayor and city council. Mayor and the corporate elite of our city, the chambers of commerce, downtown council said, nah, we don't need that. In fact, we need to put more power into the hands of the mayor over all of our departments, even though he has a documented history of just failing so egregiously when it came to just the one department, the police department. So that got struck down. A mayor got killed on February 2nd. And even before then, my office has been, very public in our calls to the mayor to create a new Department of Public Safety that it prioritizes the expansion of unarmed services, that focuses on mental health, domestic violence, sexual assault, all the areas of services that our current police department does not tend to. So after Amir Locke, was murdered, one of my council members and I introduced an amendment to basically create that new department on the legislative process. And really invest in this new model of delivering public safety services to our residents, and hopefully create a new standard in which the world will recognize us for, because folks are knowing Minneapolis now based off of propaganda of like, oh, that's police violence, like police violence central, or, oh, now that's just like crime haven. Everybody is a criminal there. So those are kind of the two kind of narratives that shape in Minneapolis. Here's the opportunity to show that, no, we learned our lesson. We actually want to do better when it comes to public safety, and we're not going to invest in what's been well documented is not working. Unfortunately, apparently we have leaders who don't think working class people, especially Black people, still don't deserve nice things. And the mayor actually, as of last week, directed most of our council members to kill our proposal for creating a new Department of Public Safety. And it was timely because literally the next day that Department of Human Rights article came out, and the benefits of being an independent. I called that out. Like, whatever proposal you had, Mayor, that includes MPD, this invalidates this. It's time to put a new department back on a new Department of Public Safety back on the table, and one that actually invests in unarmed services, that invests in real accountability over our public safety workers. And we don't have any time left. Like, we don't have time for you to play games. council can lead this work up now while you figure out what you need to do with this consent decree and getting MPD together. But we should not be continuing to be held hostage by the dysfunctionality of our police department and not be allowed to invest in what actually works.
Yeah. It's really wild, these sort of waves of reaction. It seemed like 4 or 5 years ago, there was maybe, you see that Democrats, they paid lip service to defund and all that stuff, right? And then now you look at now and everybody from that sort of class of people can't help but like throw defund under the bus or this or that and say, we need more police on every corner. And, they should be, doing chores for you in the house or something like that.
It's real. Go teaching wild. Your kids. You got a teaching shortage. It's okay. We'll send the police there.
Fully armed. Yeah. We got 2 more topics. I know we've gone a little bit long here, but I do want to ask, we talked with Jake about the rent control in St. Paul. And then my understanding was Minneapolis was also looking toward a similar policy, hopefully as ambitious. Where are we at with housing in Minneapolis?
Oh, it's still trash. Summary of it, still trash. Still cost burden. So yes, on November, one of the highlights of our elections was question 3, which would have given council members, the authority to move forward with creating a rent control policy. That passed overwhelmingly. What's hilarious though is that our mayor, his name very clearly, he opposes that. He also is like, I don't think just because the voters said they want that we need this. And of course, that translated to majority of our council members who are like, do we really need to talk about this? And because of the pressing of our office, along with our, socialist comrades, we made it very clear that like we're not doing nothing this term without rent control being on the books. Like we need to pass rent control. And we've named very clearly it needs to be the policy that has been implemented in St. Paul, right next door, 3%, no vacancy decontrol, and universal. We don't need exemptions for big developers. Like they're not going to struggle from this. It's like 15 PTSD again. They're like, rent control is going to drive all the developers. A 3% cap, really? That's really going to drive them away? Maybe they should go. But like we've been very clear, that's the policy. That's the strongest policy right now in the country, and we should be following suit. Several weeks ago, we had, instead of passing just that policy, majority of council members voted that down and decided to do a work group instead. We love work groups in local politics. And that work group will be charged and stacked with stakeholder groups, one including the Minnesota Multi-Housing Authority that dropped over $4 million to defeat rent control. They get to be part of this work group to create the policy, hopefully for 2023. We already know that work group main charge is to create the weakest policy possible. So my office will be again in lockstep with our movements and renters and working class people on the ground, making sure that, they know they're on watch and that the strongest policy needs to be recommended from there. So that's kind of where we're at on rent control. The efforts to water it down as much as possible is underway. But I think it's also important. We saw, rent control has to be complementary to so many other fights and really moving us towards this vision of having equitable, profit-driven housing in our city. So to us, that's a fight for public housing. We need to be investing more public dollars into the construction and maintenance of public housing. And cities should be looking at, what mechanisms we have to direct more public dollars towards that instead of privatizing public housing. My office is excited about exploring what a vacancy tax can look like. We have so many of these high-end developments that's being built in our city, and many of those units are sitting empty or being used for short-term rentals that are expensive as hell. Like, no, you do not get to just build vacant units in our city while we have a growing homeless crisis too. And we're also saying it has to be coupled to that too, a robust, humane response to our unsheltered residents. We need to be looking at how we're not just doing an eviction model, which is apparently the way that Eric Adams and Mayor Jacob Fry think is the way to go. We need to be making sure that we're investing in transitional, quality transitional and permanent housing, and using public dollars to do so. So we think that has to be, connected to a broader, robust working class housing program that my office is excited to be, working with a number of housing advocate groups with leaders like Jake and moving that forward in addition to rent control.
Right on. And then finally, news of the week is really this leaked draft. I don't know who leaked it, but a leaked draft of an announcement by the Supreme Court gutting Roe versus Wade. What is the socialist response to this? Because I think everyone's a little bit maybe disillusioned by the liberal response.
I don't know if this is the hood response or not, but I'm like, fight.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the thing. Like, how do you think those things happen? People did mass protests. Like, things like got really bad. Like, in terms of like people taking direct action to make those things happen in the first place. And we see the conservative right wing, movement be unbothered by all the extra noise. They are going after their assignment, like full steam ahead, in eroding and attacking all of these civil protections that social movements fought diligently for, that people died for. People, like, let's not even ignore, people rioted, like held whole uprisings for these basic protections that have now been overturned. And I think what we often hear as a liberal pathway is like, well, let's lead the appeal process. Like, that's on the table. Like, we need to appeal the decision from the Supreme Court, and through litigation we'll make something happen. There should be mass protests right now outside of every state capital, outside of the Supreme Courts. Actually, where are they playing golf at? Because there's no way you should be able to make that decision and then go play golf or enjoy dinner with anyone. And you should be uncomfortable for the next several days. And so much so that you go back and do your job and like overturn this bullshit ass decision that you made. But like, there should be massive mobilizations that happens right now. And I know there's a lot again around litigation. It's unfortunate that also the only thing on the table, this is something my office is going to be exploring over the next several days, how to make Minnesota or Minneapolis is at least a safe harbor. But that, like, I'm really excited to explore, but that needs to happen with, our state leadership at the forefront. And once again, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Democratic House. Fine, the Senate is trash. Sure, we'll concede that to them. But our governor for the past like 24 hours have been like, if you vote for me, because elections is November, I will make sure Minnesota will remain a safe space. How about you do it now? And what is really something that grinds my gears? Like, I went to a constituent event today, and Walt sent out a text message on the campaign side to, people. One of the attendees had it, and I was like, does that text say, does it have a donation link? And it did. They're like, donate first. I'm not going to do it now, even though I have authority and I'm in office right now. I'm not going to do this now. I'm not going to pass the legislation that you didn't even have to do the work for. External groups have already drafted up the legislation. They just need you to put your John Hancock on it and sign it and say, I don't care what you guys say, GOP in the Senate, we're doing this. Fine, fight me. Cool. Like, it's signed. Like, that's all you need to do. And you're like, no, let's wait till November. Let's wait for things to get really bad so you can vote for me in hopes that things will get better, and drop me a donation while you're at it.
Yeah.
Like, no. No.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear that there's mobilizations happening now. For instance, at 5:00, I'm attending it at the Hennepin Government Center, where one of the leading pro-choice groups are going to be holding an action. I know there's one tomorrow that's going to be at the Capitol. Like, this is a time where, if there was ever a need to bear hug your Democrats and the governors who is on your side, to be like, you need to deliver now. We are not waiting till November under the guise that you might do something. We already saw how that played out with Biden. We got promised a lot with student debt, with voter rights, with Build Back Better. We got Build Back nothing. Like, there's been nothing. You are going to actually do something for working class people, and do it now. So,
and not just fundraise off of them, their concerns.
I was like, are you being for real right now? Like,
yeah, I mean, the DCC chair, the Sean Patrick Maloney was going off about that. They're like, we are mad and we're feeling very bad, but remember, it's all about November.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you all have
Give
like
us your
the
email.
control. There are plenty of things that you could do, immediately to protect this right. And two, how about we start taking much more seriously, I think, the real democratic threat in general that the Supreme Court, is, right? Like, you have a bunch of unelected elders who get to decide what laws we have in this country with no reflection of like what popular sentiment is on that. That's, to use your language, trash. And like, we gotta, we gotta be doing much better at like not just like being able to fight these like immediate desperate fights that are right in front of us, but like also reminding people, it's like, this is the context where this shit happens. This is them trying to take away your individual rights, but also your democratic rights to decide what world you want to live in. A hell of a lot in front of us, Lord.
But we're not alone. And I mean, to me, again, like I see this as, it's fucked up. I'm going to acknowledge that all of this is messed up. It's nothing about this feels good. Every single day, it feels like there is something burning on fire. There's a crisis that needs to be attended to. Welcome to racial capitalism. That's the conditions that working class people have to suffer under. And it gets tiring that we're always fighting for something. We're fighting against someone or something for something better. And I think the thing that gives me hope of like, even again, being in this position now, I just 6 months ago to go from, we would never imagine having one socialist, let alone an independent, like elected leader, to having 3, like that's all through working class struggle. And I think we're in a moment where we're redefining what struggle looks like for us. And that is necessary to build the different world that we're trying to create. I think, there was those struggles that took place in the 40s, the 50s that built up to many of the civil liberties that we are seeing being attacked every single day. And I think we need to be, especially on the left, and as we're engaging with those who might not be where we are politically, we need to reflect on lessons from that. Like, those things are crumbling for a reason. And how do we build something that's actually going to sustain, the future that we're all committed, a future where, no, we don't have unelected people making decisions over our lives, which is just capitalism in itself. If it's not the Supreme Court, it's a shareholder who gets to determine how much of your wages you get to take home, or it's a landlord who gets to dictate how much of your wages do you pay them towards rent, something that should be a basic necessity. So I think this is an opportunity for us to really think, if we have all these influencers over our lives that we don't elect, that democratically don't represent our interests, how do we collectively start to identify that, dismantle that, and build for something better in its place? And I see people commit. The fact that I still see working class people showing up every single day. And I think the uprising was a real important testament of that. Like, literally, the city, the state ran away. The city was burning. We know what the hell was happening. And in this absence, I saw neighbors who ain't never spoke to each other in 20 years, white folks who might have thoughts about like certain communities, like built their own self-defense committees. They built medic groups. They built food distribution sites to tend to everyday people needs. And it's moments like that that gives me confidence that we're going to be okay. It's going to be messy. It's going to feel bad. We're going to get lots of bruises in this chapter where we're at, but we're going to come out better because we're navigating this together, because we ain't got no choice. So I feel that gives me the hope that I need to be able to navigate and bear witness to all of this mess that we're having to endure.
Absolutely. Well, Robin Wonsley at Robin, the number 4 MPLS on Twitter. You have the biggest, if people can't tell already, the largest endorsement we give out here at Left Reckoning. Where can people support you in the future?
Yes. Please come check out Robin for Minneapolis, and minus the 4, but Robin, FORMPLS.com. We have a podcast up there as well, where we get to talk to local leaders and some national leaders too about how we're all working together in this movement for a world that's free from racial capitalism. If there's ever opportunities you want to also have me come out and speak or or attend actions. If y'all got any connections on how I can get out to New York and and kick it with Chris Smalls and they whole crew at Amazon Labor, like, please, I will fly myself out. Like, I'm down to support and join working class struggles all over outside of Minnesota so that we can come back and let folks know we're not by ourselves. There's a gang of us that's ready. So, check us out at Robin from Minneapolis. And yeah, bring me back, Matt and David. Like, this is great.
Anytime. We had a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Robin.
Thanks, y'all.